Hello and welcome to our general onboarding training. My name is Fumi Ayeni and I will be leading this training today. First, thank you for your interest in joining our organization and your commitment to improving the experiences of survivors of gender and sexual-based violence. Today, we will be going over some relevant information that you should know. You should have received information regarding our agency and the departments you may be interested in working with directly, so we will not be going over that in this training. Instead, we will be focusing on general considerations for working with survivors of violence, ethical principles, vicarious trauma, and self-care. Please pay close attention to the information that I will share today, as you will be required to complete an assessment at the end of this training to test your understanding of these concepts. All right, everyone, let's get started with general considerations. At STER, we utilize a survivor-centered approach to providing support and related care to our clients and members of the broader community. A survivor-centered approach to violence against women and girls seeks to empower the survivor by prioritizing her rights, needs, and wishes. It means ensuring that survivors have access to appropriate, accessible, and good quality services, including healthcare, psychological and social support, security, and legal services. It is essential that competent service delivery actors have the right attitudes, knowledge, and skills to provide the survivor's own experiences and input. By using this approach, you can create a supportive environment in which the survivor's rights are respected and in which they are treated with dignity and respect. A survivor-centered approach helps to promote a survivor's recovery and to reinforce their capacity to make decisions about possible interventions. Let's take a look at this table, which compares survivors' rights with negative impacts they typically experience. As you can see, a survivor's rights include being treated with dignity and respect, the right to choose the course of action when dealing with violence, the right to privacy and confidentiality, and the right to receive comprehensive information so they can make an informed decision. On the other hand, when we violate the survivor's rights, negative impacts may include victim blaming, feelings of powerlessness, shame and stigma, discrimination, lack of autonomy, and an increased risk for experiencing future victimization. Privacy and confidentiality is a very important topic, and we'll talk more about this in a bit. Okay, so now that we have a good understanding of what a survivor-centered approach entails, let's talk more about how this can be done in practice. As someone affiliated with STER, it is possible that you may interact quite often with survivors. Your interactions with survivors are important, and you should ensure that you think carefully about your words and actions during these interactions. This is particularly important when someone discloses an experience of violence to you. I will go over some of the ways in which you should respond to disclosures. You can affirm the person's truth by saying statements such as, "I believe you," and "It wasn't your fault." So start with this. Thank the survivor for sharing the information with you and let them guide the conversation. Avoid passing judgment or asking too many questions, but instead focus on listening and being there for the survivor. Ensure that you listen empathetically and not sympathizing with the survivor. These concepts are different. Another important consideration is the impact of your personal and moral values, as well as your personal biases on your interactions with survivors. Can you think of a time when you were aware of a bias that you had? Did it impact the way that you treated someone? It's important that you are aware of your personal biases and that you do not let them get in the way of truly helping someone to the best of your ability. We are human. You will have these and other reactions to victims. Now, these reactions are key to be attuned to later when we talk about boundaries and acting in an ethical way to clients. It is really important to be honest with yourself and your supervisor about your feelings and reactions so that you can identify plausible triggers and understand the issue before an ethical line is crossed. These are some of the feelings that you should be aware of. And you need to be aware of these reactions to the survivor. If you experience avoidance, anger, a need to rescue, denial or minimization of their trauma, condemnation of their actions or their trauma, and contempt, you need to ensure that you process these feelings and, if necessary, ultimately recuse yourself from the survivor's care if you think that it will impact your ability to provide optimal services. In addition to self-awareness, communication is key to maintaining professional boundaries with a survivor. You must communicate in a way that demonstrates empathy, provides information in easy to understand terms. Can you think of a time when you failed to clearly communicate limitations of your role? Think about what was going on at that time that prevented you from being clear. Once you have identified the issue, predetermine how you will overcome the issue in the future to avoid any misunderstandings and ensure that you clearly communicate. Next, we'll go over some ethical considerations that are essential when working with survivors. Ethics is an essential component of a survivor-centered approach. And in your time with STER, we expect that you maintain the highest standards of ethical responsibility and integrity, as the lives of our clients and community members depend on it. As a volunteer with STER, you must ensure privacy and confidentiality when working with our clients. Do not share any information regarding a survivor without the survivor's informed consent, particularly when working on multi-departmental coordinated activities. This means that even within STER, you cannot have conversations with other volunteers that disclose personal and identifiable information about our clients. You cannot share client files that include identifiable information with unauthorized personnel. When in doubt, always check in with your supervisor for clarification. Informed consent is another important element of privacy and confidentiality. When working with survivors, the informed consent is crucial and is much more than providing a form for them to sign or asking for verbal agreement. When collecting any information from a survivor, you must recognize that the individual providing the information may feel compelled to answer questions and agree to requests, regardless of their own discomfort, risk, or preference. This is why you must pay particular attention to how you ask for information and seek consent. Pay careful attention to how the information is provided to and by the survivor. Ensure that you carefully consider the issues of power that may be at play in the setting and in the interaction. The consent agreement should include all relevant information, including the nature of confidentiality of their responses, their rights to refuse to take part in the service or answer any particular questions, whether the information will be shared, and if so, how and with whom it is shared, as well as the survivor's rights to put restrictions on how the information can be shared and used. Read the consent language out loud in the survivor's first language and allow the survivor enough time to answer questions and clarify the details of the agreement. This should be done in person, over the phone, or other virtual methods. Do not assume that the survivor will read and understand the agreement on their own time. Ensure that you reinforce anything that is not clearly understood and that you correct all misunderstandings. Ensure that you strictly adhere to all confidentiality protocols implemented by your department. If you think that confidentiality has been breached in any way, immediately reach out to your supervisor to discuss a plan of action. As a volunteer with STER, you must also ensure that your actions are non-discriminatory towards all survivors and clients. At STER, we do not charge survivors for any of the services we provide. On no occasion should you request or accept any payment in cash or kind from our clients. Only our executive staff handle all corporate level services for which we may require payment. You must ensure that the same level and quality of care and assistance is provided for all persons seeking support, regardless of any of their social demographic characteristics, such as age, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, ability status, socioeconomic status, education, language, religious or political affiliation, amongst other characteristics. Ensure that you offer a range of support options that are available while taking into account the particular needs of women facing multiple forms of discrimination. All right, everyone, we've covered a ton of information so far, and now is a good time to hit pause and stretch your legs or get a glass of water before we move into our final section for this training. Do not be away for too long. Welcome back from your break, if you took one. And if you decided to keep going, I hope you're hanging in there. I sure am. All right, let's get started with our section on vicarious trauma and self-care. Vicarious trauma is a term that's used to describe the negative psychological consequences people in the helping profession, such as you, may experience as a result of being exposed to survivors' accounts of trauma and witnessing the survivor's pain and suffering. Vicarious trauma has also been called compassion fatigue, empathic strain, and secondary trauma. Vicarious trauma may be thought of as the natural behaviors and emotions resulting from knowing about gender-based violence and other traumas. Any advocate such as yourself who bears witness to these stories of survivors will experience some degree of vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is sometimes referred to as secondary trauma because it refers to the traumatic symptoms experienced by those who care for, are involved with, others who have been directly traumatized. It is a result of hearing about another person's trauma. Sometimes gender-based violence advocates engage in such trauma on a daily basis. The symptoms associated with vicarious trauma are very similar to PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And these may include nightmares, intrusive thoughts, numbing, or dissociation. Some signs and symptoms of vicarious trauma include physical reactions such as fatigue or lack of energy, sleep or appetite disturbance, muscle tensions or aches, stomach aches, headaches, sexual difficulties. An individual may also have psychological reactions, including recurrent dreams or nightmares, intrusive imagery, flashbacks, decreased motivation, cynicism, and a shift in worldview, which involves a disruption in important beliefs that advocates feel about themselves, others, or the world. Similarly, behavioral reactions may include withdrawal from supports, withdrawal from work or over-involvement in work, and difficulty balancing work and personal life. Since all individuals working with victims of sexual and gender-based violence will experience some degree of vicarious trauma, understanding and working with vicarious trauma is both an individual and organizational challenge. We will talk about what you can do on an individual level to prevent and/or heal from vicarious trauma and discuss boundaries in advocacy relationships. The experience of working with survivors affects both personal and professional life. Please note that having and/or suffering from vicarious trauma is not a sign of weakness. There are important measures that advocates can take to prevent or heal from vicarious trauma. Let's talk about some of them. Coping with vicarious trauma involves understanding the dynamics of vicarious trauma. It also involves understanding that vicarious trauma is very common for people in helping professions. You must also know your own issues and vulnerabilities. For example, what kind of traumas might trigger something emotional for you? Ensure that you set boundaries. Take breaks when you need to. Just ensure that you communicate adequately with your supervisor. Also make sure that you are balancing work, play, and spiritual renewal in any way that makes sense for you. Seek supervision. Reach out to your department lead or direct supervisor when you feel overwhelmed and need to take a step back. Access your support system. My hope is that you all have family and friends that care deeply about you. Lean on them for support in times like this. If symptoms persist, please seek professional help and counseling, as this is very important for your mental health. With the understanding that anyone can experience vicarious trauma and that everyone will experience some form of it, it is extremely important that you take care of yourself. So I'm going to talk about various ways in which you can participate in self-care. Self-care is a critical part of responding to vicarious trauma and keeping you healthy in general. Self-care includes seeking immediate support after particularly difficult advocacy interactions. Like I mentioned earlier, it's important that you are aware of your own triggers and that you're able to debrief with a trusted person as soon as possible after encountering a trigger. Often, this support system will include other advocates and other volunteers within STER, or it may include friends or family members. At times, these supports may not be adequate or accessible. As such, please consider personal therapy if the symptoms become overwhelming or if you feel like they are affecting your functioning at work or in situations. Often, this kind of support, again, might include people who are not within your personal circle. So make sure that you seek out all of the support that you need. You can also practice self-care by doing something for yourself. Cook yourself a nice meal, clean your house, or make your bed. Take a long shower, buy a special treat. I enjoy all kinds of food, or get a manicure. Physical exercise or release is also an important part of a self-care plan. Massage may provide a physical relief of traumatic stories that are held in the body, and exercise releases powerful chemicals that help to reestablish a sense of well-being and diffuse anxiety and depression. The most important component of self-care involves your commitment to self-development and preservation. We all grow and change, This growth can be positive and invigorating, or it can lead us in negative directions. Ensure that you take a mindful, proactive approach to coping and growing. Okay, that's it. This concludes our training for today. I hope you have learned something useful for your new responsibility as a volunteer with STER. As a reminder, today, we went over general considerations for working with survivors, ethical practices, vicarious trauma, and self-care. Remember to complete your test, as it is the only proof that you have completed this training successfully. To pass your test, you need to score at least 80%. Thank you once again for your commitment to STER and the survivors that we share, and I sincerely hope that you have an amazing volunteering experience with us. Till we meet again, goodbye, and again, my name is Fumi Ayeni.